February 14, 2023 at about 11:38 p.m. Snow falling lightly over downtown Chicago. Riverside Heights Apartments, Building C, Apartment 3B. Inside that apartment, the soft glow of candlelight flickered against walls decorated with red roses, heart-shaped balloons, and carefully placed photographs of memories that once meant everything. Outside, couples were laughing, restaurants were closing, and Valentine's Day was ending the way it usually does, with kisses, promises, and warm embraces. But inside apartment 3B, Valentine's Day ended with a scream. A scream so raw and fractured that the neighbors later said it did not sound human. When police arrived at 11:52 p.m., they found the front door slightly open. The scent of expensive cologne mixed with iron hung thick in the air. A dinner table was set for three wine glasses, 3 plates, a half-cut chocolate cake with "Forever Us" written in white icing. On the marble floor near the balcony doors lay Marcus Hale, 30 years old, successful real estate investor, beloved son, and best friend to Daniel Carter for over 2 decades. His white shirt was soaked through. And standing near the kitchen island, pale and trembling, was Daniel. But the most haunting detail was not the blood. It was not the overturned chair. It was not even the knife lying near the roses. It was the engagement ring box sitting open on the table, empty. And near the balcony, gripping the railing as if the world beneath her might swallow her whole, stood Olivia Bennet, the woman both men loved, though only one of them was supposed to. By midnight, everything they had built over 22 years had collapsed into sirens, flashing lights, and irreversible choices. If you think betrayal only happens between lovers, stay with this story, because sometimes the deepest betrayal is not romantic. It is brotherhood turning into rivalry, loyalty turning into jealousy, and love turning into possession. And if stories like this pull you in and make you question human nature, make sure you subscribe and leave your thoughts in the comments, because this one will challenge everything you think you know about friendship. Now let's rewind. It all began in 2001 on the south side of Chicago, where 2 10-year-old boys met during a summer basketball tournament that neither of them even wanted to attend. Daniel was quiet, observant, the type of boy who thought before he spoke and carried his emotions like fragile glass. Marcus was confident, magnetic, the kind of kid who could turn strangers into friends within minutes and make teachers believe he was destined for greatness. They were opposites in personality but identical in ambition. When Marcus missed a free throw that would have won the game, it was Daniel who walked over, picked up the ball, and said, "We'll win next time." It was not the sentence that bonded them. It was the certainty in Daniel's voice. Marcus saw loyalty that day. Daniel saw strength. From that moment, they became inseparable. They studied together. They defended each other in fights. They spent holidays at each other's houses until their families joked that they might as well be brothers. When Marcus's father left, it was Daniel's mother who made sure he had a place at Thanksgiving dinner. When Daniel struggled with confidence in high school, it was Marcus who stood beside him and reminded everyone that Daniel was the smartest person in the room. They made promises late at night on rooftops, staring at city lights, promising success, loyalty, and a future where nothing would come between them. And for years, nothing did. College strengthened them even more. They roomed together at Northwestern University, built small business ideas in their dorm room, stayed up until sunrise talking about money, women, ambition, and legacy. They dreamed of becoming powerful together, of building something that would make their younger selves proud. After graduation, they started investing in real estate. Marcus handled negotiations, Daniel handled strategy. Within 5 years, they were making more money than they had ever imagined as children on the South Side. They bought cars. They moved into better neighborhoods. They celebrated milestones with expensive dinners and louder laughter. From the outside, they were untouchable. But success does not only amplify wealth. It amplifies ego. It amplifies insecurity. It amplifies the quiet thoughts you hope never grow teeth. And then Olivia Bennet entered the picture. It was at a charity gala in 2018 where Daniel first noticed her standing near the balcony, wearing a deep red dress that matched nothing and everything at the same time. She was intelligent, poised, and spoke with the kind of calm confidence that did not demand attention but naturally commanded it. Daniel was the first to approach her that night. They spoke about books, architecture, and travel. He felt seen in a way he rarely did. Marcus noticed her too. But Marcus noticed something else, the way Daniel's voice softened around her. At first, it was harmless. Olivia began attending their gatherings. She laughed at Marcus's jokes and debated ideas with Daniel. Slowly, she became part of their world. The three of them had dinners together, traveled together, celebrated birthdays together. It felt balanced. Until it wasn't. Daniel fell in love quietly, deeply, patiently. He planned. He waited. He believed timing was everything. Marcus, however, was not patient by nature. He thrived on momentum, on intensity, on winning. And somewhere between late-night conversations and shared business trips, Marcus and Olivia grew closer in ways Daniel did not see, or perhaps refused to see. There were signs. Olivia canceling plans with Daniel because she was busy. Marcus avoiding eye contact when Daniel spoke about proposing. A shift in energy that no one acknowledged but everyone felt. If you have ever ignored a red flag because you trusted someone too much, you understand the danger Daniel was walking into. And I want you to think about that as you watch this unfold. How often do we overlook betrayal because it comes wrapped in familiarity? By early 2023, Daniel had bought the ring. He planned the perfect Valentine's dinner. He booked the rooftop apartment. He ordered roses in her favorite shade. He invited Marcus too, believing he was including his brother in the biggest moment of his life. He had no idea Marcus had already made a different decision. On February 14th at 10:15 p.m., Olivia arrived first. She looked nervous. Marcus arrived 15 minutes later, tension hidden behind his usual charm. Daniel arrived last, carrying the cake and the future he thought was secure. The air felt strange. At 11:27 p.m., Daniel excused himself to grab the ring from the bedroom drawer. At 11:32 p.m., he overheard something he was never meant to hear. Whispers. Olivia's voice breaking. Marcus saying, "He doesn't have to find out like this." And in that moment, something inside Daniel cracked. What happened in the 6 minutes between 11:32 and 11:38 p.m. is the reason apartment 3B became a crime scene. It is the reason sirens filled the night. It is the reason two families stopped speaking. And it is the reason Valentine's Day will never mean the same thing to any of them again. Because betrayal between lovers hurts. But betrayal between best friends? That destroys something far deeper. At exactly 11:32 p.m., as snow pressed softly against the balcony glass and the city lights flickered below like indifferent witnesses, Daniel Carter stood frozen in the hallway outside his bedroom, the small velvet ring box heavy in his palm. He had returned quietly, intending to surprise Olivia with a proposal that would seal what he believed was the strongest chapter of his life. Instead, he heard something that did not belong in his home on that night. A whisper layered with guilt. Olivia's voice trembled first. "I can't keep lying to him." The sentence did not come out confidently. It came out tired, fractured, almost pleading. Daniel's body reacted before his mind did. His grip tightened around the ring box until the edges pressed painfully into his skin. His breathing slowed, not from calmness but from disbelief. The hallway suddenly felt narrower, as though the walls were leaning inward to hear more clearly. Marcus responded in a lower tone, the kind of voice he used when negotiating high-stakes deals. "He doesn't have to find out tonight. Not like this. We'll tell him after." That single word struck Daniel harder than anything else. After the proposal? After humiliation? After he stood before the woman he loved and offered her forever, unaware that forever had already been shared in secret? Daniel did not move immediately. He did not storm into the living room. He did not shout. What made the moment more dangerous was his silence. Because when a man who has always been loyal feels betrayal forming in real time, the destruction begins internally before it ever becomes visible. He replayed every memory at once. The late nights Marcus claimed he was busy. The canceled dinners. The subtle glances between Marcus and Olivia that he dismissed as imagination. The way Marcus had insisted on being present tonight. The way Olivia seemed distant when Daniel spoke about the future. The pieces were no longer abstract. They were aligning. Daniel stepped forward slowly, each footfall deliberate against the hardwood floor, until he stood at the edge of the living room. The candles flickered between them, casting moving shadows that distorted their faces. Marcus and Olivia were standing closer than they should have been. Not touching, but close enough that the air between them carried intimacy. When they noticed Daniel, the silence did not feel accidental. It felt exposed. Marcus was the first to speak, but his usual confidence was missing. "Dan, I was just explaining something." Daniel laughed softly, but there was nothing humorous in it. It was the sound of disbelief breaking open. "Explaining what?" he asked, his voice disturbingly calm. "Explaining why my best friend and the woman I love are whispering about me in my own apartment on Valentine's Day?" Olivia's eyes filled with tears instantly, and that reaction alone confirmed more than words ever could. Daniel's heart did not shatter in one dramatic burst. It fractured quietly, piece by piece, with each second of silence that followed. Marcus stepped forward, raising his hands slightly as if calming a tense business partner, not confronting a wounded brother. "It's not what you think," he said, but even he seemed unconvinced by the sentence. Daniel opened the ring box and placed it gently on the dining table next to the cake. The diamond caught the candlelight, sparkling with cruel irony. He looked at Olivia, searching her face for denial, for clarity, for something that would undo what he had just heard. "Tell me," Daniel said, his voice lowering now, "that there's nothing to confess." Olivia tried to speak, but emotion blocked her. Marcus looked at her, then back at Daniel, and in that exchange Daniel saw it. A shared understanding that did not include him. And that was when the truth finally surfaced. It had started 6 months earlier, after a business trip to New York. Marcus and Olivia had spent more time together while Daniel remained behind to finalize contracts. Conversations had deepened. Boundaries had blurred. What began as emotional closeness gradually crossed into something neither of them initially intended, but neither stopped. They convinced themselves it was temporary. They convinced themselves Daniel would never know. They convinced themselves loyalty could bend without breaking. But loyalty does not bend. It either stands firm or it collapses entirely. As Olivia spoke through tears, explaining how confused she had been, how she never meant for it to go this far, Daniel felt anger rising not just at them, but at himself. He had trusted Marcus with everything: money, reputation, family access, emotional vulnerability. He had trusted Olivia with his heart. Now both stood before him connected by betrayal. If you are watching this and you have ever placed complete trust in someone, pause for a moment and ask yourself how you would react in this position. Would you shout? Would you walk away? Would you forgive? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, because every reaction reveals something about human nature, and stories like this force us to confront uncomfortable truths. And if you appreciate storytelling that goes beneath the surface, make sure you stay subscribed, because we are only peeling back the first layer. Marcus finally admitted what Daniel feared most, that he loved her too. Not a mistake. Not a moment of weakness. That word detonated whatever restraint Daniel had left. The years of brotherhood, the shared dreams, the rooftop promises, the silent sacrifices, all of it felt mocked in that single confession. Daniel stepped closer to Marcus, and for the first time in their 22-year friendship, there was no warmth in his eyes. "You loved her," Daniel repeated slowly, while pretending to stand beside me. Marcus did not deny it. And that is when the first shove happened. It was not dramatic at first. Just a sudden push of accumulated rage. Marcus stumbled backward into the table, knocking over a wine glass. Red liquid spilled across the white tablecloth like a preview of what was to come. Olivia screamed for them to stop, but neither man was listening anymore. They were no longer two successful entrepreneurs in an elegant apartment. They were wounded boys fighting over something deeper than a woman. They were fighting over pride, over betrayal, over the collapse of identity. Marcus swung first. Not hard enough to incapacitate, but hard enough to ignite. Daniel responded with equal force. Years of suppressed insecurity about living in Marcus's shadow poured into every movement. The fight moved from the dining table to the living room, knocking over chairs, shattering glass, destroying the romantic setup that had taken hours to prepare. In the chaos, Olivia tried to pull them apart. She screamed their names repeatedly, but anger is louder than reason. Marcus grabbed Daniel by the collar. Daniel pushed back. They stumbled toward the balcony. And in the struggle, something happened that none of them fully intended. The knife that had been used earlier to slice the cake fell from the counter during the scuffle. In the blur of motion, in the collision of rage and betrayal, Marcus lost his footing. There was a sharp movement, a cry of pain, and then silence. The kind of silence that arrives after something irreversible. Marcus looked down first. Then Daniel did. And when they both saw the red spreading across white fabric, the fight ended instantly. Marcus collapsed near the balcony doors, his breathing shallow, shock overtaking adrenaline. Olivia dropped to her knees beside him, her hands pressing desperately against the wound as if pressure alone could reverse consequences. Daniel stood there, frozen, staring at his hands as though they belonged to someone else. Outside, the city continued as normal. Couples laughed in the snow. Cars passed. Music played in distant apartments. Inside 3B, everything had ended. The betrayal was no longer emotional. It was physical. It was permanent. And the worst part was not just what had happened, it was the realization that neither of them could ever return to who they were before 11:32 p.m. As sirens grew louder in the distance, Daniel finally understood that Valentine's Day would forever be associated not with love, but with the night loyalty died. By 11:52 p.m., the red and blue lights reflecting off the snow outside Riverside Heights apartments turned Valentine's night into something surreal, almost theatrical, as if the universe itself had decided to spotlight the collapse of a 22-year brotherhood. Inside apartment 3B, the warmth of candlelight had long been replaced by the cold authority of police flashlights scanning every surface, every broken glass shard, every overturned chair that told a story no one wanted to fully explain. Marcus lay near the balcony doors, conscious but fading, his breathing uneven, each inhale a visible struggle. Olivia's hands were stained as she pressed down desperately, whispering his name as though repetition could anchor him to the present. Daniel stood a few feet away, his back against the wall, staring at the chaos like a man watching his own life from outside his body. The officers entered cautiously, weapons drawn at first, because when dispatch receives a call about a possible stabbing on Valentine's night, they expect the worst. What they found instead was not a calculated crime scene, but the wreckage of emotion that had spiraled out of control. They separated the three immediately. Questions began flying before anyone could fully process what had happened. What's your name? Who did this? Is anyone else in the apartment? Daniel answered mechanically, his voice hollow, his words stripped of tone. He did not try to run. He did not deny involvement. He did not point fingers. He simply said, it was an accident. But even he seemed unsure whether that word was strong enough to carry the weight of what had just occurred. As paramedics worked to stabilize Marcus, the gravity of the situation settled over the room like thick fog. Olivia refused to move from Marcus's side until officers physically guided her away. She kept repeating that this was not supposed to happen, that none of this was supposed to happen, that they were just going to tell him the truth after dinner. The repetition sounded like confession and denial wrapped into one fragile statement. Outside, neighbors gathered despite the cold, whispering in hushed disbelief. Just hours earlier, they had seen the trio laughing in the elevator. Now they watched as Marcus was wheeled out on a stretcher, oxygen mask secured, his once confident presence reduced to vulnerability under flashing lights. Daniel followed in handcuffs, not resisting, not speaking, just staring forward as snowflakes landed silently on his shoulders. If you have ever seen how quickly life can pivot from celebration to catastrophe, you understand how thin the line truly is between control and chaos. Stories like this remind us how one emotional decision can rewrite decades of loyalty. As you watch this unfold, I want you to reflect on something personal. Would pride ever push you past a point of no return? Share your thoughts below, because conversations like this matter more than we realize. And if you value deep storytelling that explores human complexity without shortcuts, make sure you are subscribed so you do not miss what comes next. At the hospital, Marcus underwent emergency surgery. The injury, though severe, had not struck a fatal point. Doctors worked through the early morning hours while two families began receiving phone calls that would fracture their perception of reality. Daniel's mother arrived at the police station just after 1:30 a.m., her face pale, her hands trembling, asking over and over what her son could possibly have done. Marcus's older sister arrived at the hospital, disbelief etched into every step she took down the sterile hallway. By sunrise, the story had already begun spreading through social media and local news outlets. Headlines did not mention childhood loyalty or rooftop promises. They did not mention years of partnership or shared ambition. They reduced everything to a single sentence: man stabs best friend during Valentine's Day dispute. But what the headlines could not capture was the emotional autopsy happening inside each of them. Daniel sat in an interrogation room that smelled faintly of coffee and old paperwork, replaying the fight over and over in his mind. He remembered the shove. He remembered the anger. He remembered Marcus admitting he loved Olivia. But he could not pinpoint the exact second when the knife entered the equation. Was it truly accidental? Had he grabbed it without thinking? Had Marcus fallen into it during the struggle? Trauma has a way of blurring sequences, and the human mind, when overwhelmed, sometimes edits its own footage. Detectives pressed carefully but firmly, aware that emotions complicate truth. They asked about jealousy, about financial disagreements, about long-standing resentment. Daniel denied any business-related tension, insisting this was personal, raw, unplanned. When asked whether he intended to harm Marcus, his response came slower this time. "I intended to confront him," he said. "I did not intend to end us." Meanwhile, at the hospital, Marcus regained consciousness in fragments. Pain returned first, then memory, then realization. When Olivia entered the room, tears already forming, Marcus did not reach for her hand. Instead, he stared at the ceiling as if searching for the moment where everything went wrong. The betrayal was no longer a secret affair. It was now public, documented, undeniable. Olivia found herself alone by mid-morning, sitting in the hospital chapel, grappling with a guilt that had expanded beyond romance. She had not held the knife. She had not thrown a punch. But she knew that the emotional collision began with her choices. She thought back to the first late-night conversation she had with Marcus during that New York trip, the way vulnerability had opened doors that should have remained closed. She thought about every time she reassured Daniel that nothing was wrong, even when something clearly was. Love, she realized, had not been the pure emotion she once believed it to be. It had been layered with validation, attention, and ego. And now 3 lives were fractured because none of them were honest soon enough. Days passed under legal scrutiny. Marcus survived, but the recovery would be long. Daniel was released on bail pending investigation, confined to his mother's house, forced into stillness for the first time in years. The business they built together froze instantly. Investors withdrew. Clients hesitated. Reputation, once polished and admired, cracked under public speculation. But the deepest damage was invisible. Daniel could not sleep without replaying Marcus's face at the moment of impact. Marcus could not close his eyes without hearing Daniel's voice repeating, "You loved her while pretending to stand beside me." Olivia existed in a suspended state of isolation, criticized by both families, uncertain whether she had lost 2 men or destroyed them. 1 week later, detectives delivered preliminary findings. Security footage from the apartment hallway captured the sound of shouting but not the interior struggle. Forensic analysis suggested the wound was consistent with chaotic movement rather than a deliberate forward thrust. The case would likely hinge on testimony, on memory, on interpretation. And that is where everything became even more complicated. Because Marcus was now faced with a decision that would define the rest of Daniel's life. Would he testify that Daniel attacked him intentionally? Or would he confirm that the injury occurred during a mutual fight spiraled by emotion? Their friendship, already shattered, now stood at the mercy of a courtroom. On the evening of February 21st, exactly 1 week after Valentine's Day, Marcus requested to speak privately with Daniel. The request stunned everyone. When Daniel entered the hospital room under supervised visitation, the air felt heavier than it had on the night of the incident. No candles. No roses. No pretense. Just two men who once called each other brothers. Marcus looked weaker, but his eyes were clear. "You didn't plan to do it?" Marcus said quietly. Daniel swallowed, his throat tightening. "I would never plan to hurt you." There was a long pause, the kind that stretches beyond comfort and into reckoning. "But you wanted to," Marcus replied. "For a second you wanted to." That sentence did not accuse. It acknowledged something darker, the truth that anger had crossed into something dangerous. And in that room, without lawyers, without police, without Olivia, they faced the ruins of what they had built. Forgiveness was not immediate. Trust was not recoverable. But the question hanging between them was far more complicated than guilt. It was this: can brotherhood survive betrayal when blood has already been spilled? Outside the hospital window, snow began falling again, soft and quiet, as if trying to cover the city in a clean layer. But some stains do not disappear that easily. On the morning of March 3, 2023, at exactly 9:14 a.m., Courtroom 6A of the Cook County Criminal Courthouse filled slowly with a silence that felt heavier than the marble pillars lining its walls. The winter sun filtered through tall windows, casting pale light across wooden benches occupied by reporters, distant relatives, and strangers drawn by curiosity. What had begun as a private betrayal between three people had now transformed into a public reckoning, documented, analyzed, and debated by people who would never fully understand the emotional history behind it. Daniel Carter stood at the defense table in a navy suit that hung slightly looser than it had a month earlier. The confident entrepreneur who once negotiated million-dollar deals without blinking now kept his hands folded tightly in front of him, as though holding himself together required physical effort. Across the aisle sat Marcus Hale, walking carefully with measured steps, his recovery visible in the stiffness of his posture. The scar beneath his shirt was healing, but scars beneath the surface are less cooperative. Olivia Bennett sat in the second row behind Marcus, her presence complicated and unwelcome to both families. She had not chosen sides publicly, yet everyone knew she had already chosen once before, and that choice had detonated everything. The prosecution laid out the events of February 14th in a way that sounded almost clinical. Raised voices. A physical altercation. A kitchen knife. Severe injury. They spoke in timelines and technical language, stripping the story of its emotional chaos. The defense countered with context. Two lifelong friends entangled in betrayal, a fight fueled by heartbreak, a wound consistent with accidental impact during mutual aggression. What the attorneys debated strategically, the three of them felt viscerally. When Marcus was called to testify, the room seemed to inhale collectively. He walked to the stand slowly, eyes forward, avoiding Daniel's gaze at first. After being sworn in, he described the night not as a calculated attack, but as a confrontation that spiraled beyond control. He admitted to the affair. He admitted to loving Olivia while knowing Daniel intended to propose. His voice did not waver when he accepted responsibility for his betrayal, and that honesty shifted the atmosphere inside the courtroom. "We fought," Marcus said clearly. "We both lost control. I don't believe he meant to stab me." That sentence altered everything. Gasps rippled through the benches. The prosecutor pressed him harder, asking whether anger had flashed in Daniel's eyes, whether he feared for his life. Marcus paused, considering carefully. "For a moment," he admitted, "we weren't brothers. We were just two angry men. But I don't believe he tried to kill me." Daniel lowered his head, emotion finally cracking through the composure he had maintained for weeks. It was not relief he felt in that moment. It was grief. Grief for what they once were. Grief for the innocence of a friendship that had survived poverty, ambition, and time, only to fall to jealousy and secrecy. If you have ever witnessed someone defend you even after you hurt them, you understand how complex forgiveness truly is. It does not erase the damage. It does not rewrite history. It simply chooses not to deepen the wound. As you reflect on this moment, ask yourself honestly, would you have done the same? Let your thoughts live in the comments, because stories like this force us to confront our own thresholds of mercy. And if you have stayed with this journey until now, make sure you are subscribed, because real human stories deserve an audience willing to look beneath the surface. Olivia was called next. Her testimony was the most painful. She described the slow drift toward Marcus, the emotional conversations that crossed lines before either of them acknowledged it. She admitted to loving Daniel once, to loving Marcus later, and to underestimating the destruction secrecy could cause. She did not blame either man entirely. She accepted her part, though acceptance did not shield her from judgment in the courtroom's silent stares. When the jury deliberated, it took less than 5 hours. Daniel was found guilty of aggravated assault but not attempted murder. The distinction mattered legally, though emotionally it felt secondary. He would serve a reduced sentence, factoring in Marcus's testimony and the lack of premeditation. It was not freedom, but it was not a life sentence either. As officers moved to escort Daniel away, he and Marcus locked eyes for the first time that day without avoidance. There was no smile, no dramatic gesture, but there was something unspoken, acknowledgement. Not of what they had become, but of what they had once been. Months passed. Daniel served his sentence quietly, avoiding interviews, declining media offers. In confinement, stripped of business deals and social validation, he was left alone with memory. He replayed childhood afternoons, rooftop promises, basketball courts, shared dreams. He realized that betrayal did not begin on Valentine's Day. It began the moment honesty was postponed. Anger had only been the final spark in a room already filled with gas. Marcus continued physical therapy, rebuilding strength slowly. He dissolved their shared business ventures, choosing distance over proximity. Success felt hollow without trust. He dated no one during that year, and Olivia eventually left Chicago altogether, relocating to Seattle in an attempt to rebuild her life away from whispers and headlines. On February 14, 2024, exactly 1 year after the night that changed everything, snow fell again over downtown Chicago. Marcus stood alone near the Riverwalk, hands in his coat pockets, watching couples pass. His phone buzzed once. It was a message from an unknown number. "I'm sorry for that night. Not just for the fight. For losing us. Daniel." Marcus stared at the screen for a long time before typing back. "We both lost us long before that night." It was not reconciliation. It was not rejection. It was truth. Some friendships end in silence. Some end in hatred. Theirs ended in painful awareness that love without boundaries becomes possession, that loyalty without honesty becomes illusion, and that pride, when left unchecked, can destroy what time carefully built. Daniel was released later that year. They did not return to being best friends. They did not rebuild the business. But they also did not become enemies. Occasionally, on birthdays or holidays, a brief message would pass between them. Simple, civil, respectful. Valentine's Day, however, remained untouched. Neither celebrated it again. Because for them, February 14th would never represent romance. It would always represent the night two best friends betrayed each other, not just through love triangles and violence, but through silence, ego, and fear of telling the truth before it was too late. And if there is one thing this story leaves behind, it is this: betrayal rarely explodes without warning. It whispers first. It tests boundaries. It waits for honesty to be delayed. By the time it screams, the damage is already done. If this story moved you, challenged you, or made you reflect on your own relationships, take a moment to like the video and share your perspective below. Stories like this grow when conversations continue, and sometimes reflection is the only way we prevent repeating the same mistakes. Because in the end, the most painful betrayals are not committed by strangers. They are committed by the people who once promised they never would.